When you rent a stranger's house, you agree to believe a story. Photos, the reviews, the friendly note from the host. They tell you everything you need to feel safe. So you drive for hours into the woods, type a code into a lockbox, and call it a vacation. You sleep in beds where other people dreamed, and you tell yourself it's normal. Maybe that's what makes it so easy for something to go wrong.
You're listening to Tonight's Terror, original horror stories to hear in the dark. Subscribe and share if you're a fan. And now, tonight's story.
"It's booked," Maggie called from another room. I was in the kitchen, staring into the refrigerator. I gave up on the notion of a snack and wandered in the direction of her voice. "What's booked?" I asked. "The Airbnb," Maggie shouted. "I'm in the computer room." "B&B," I replied, sidling up beside her at the built-in desk. "D&D is a board game." "B&B? Oh, that makes sense," she said with a sheepish smile. "Well, I booked it. The one I showed you. 4 nights next week. We got a better deal, I think, because it's not a weekend." The kids make fun of us for still calling this the computer room. They say that term died in 2005. 2005, Maggie said wistfully. "We were just pups." "Yeah, I was a pup. Barely 40, I shot back. "So you like the place?" "I hope so, because it's paid for," she said. Before I could answer, the computer blooped. A red circle appeared over a miniature envelope. "A message," Maggie exclaimed. I reclined on the futon the room had inherited when futons had been deemed unfashionable for the proper house. "It's from the property manager, Hale. He said, check-in is no earlier than 3:30 p.m. I'll meet you." "Wow," I said, raising my eyebrows. "Quite the bedside manner. I bet he didn't even use any heart emojis." "Well, let's hope he doesn't spend any time beside our bed," Maggie joked. "How do I make emojis?" Driving north through New Hampshire and into Maine was always a highlight this time of year. The highway was flanked by waves of gold, orange, and burnt red, the trees at their peak. But I don't think we could be accused of being leaf peepers. We could see foliage like that right at home in western Massachusetts. We weren't after foliage. We needed distraction, new hobbies, an excuse to get away together. The youngest of our 3 kids, Charlie, had graduated college in August and swiftly moved to the Midwest for a job. The weekend visits were over. The crowded holidays were behind us. Maggie and I felt the empty nest effect almost immediately after Charlie packed the last of his things. The house Maggie had found and booked looked to be a gem. Plenty of outdoor space, privacy, and access to hiking. We'd bought new boots and collapsible hiking poles. Those drew immediate eye rolls from Charlie. The drive into central Maine took 5 hours. The nearest big city was 50 miles away. As we passed through the last proper town, we noted a small grocery store and wine shop we could return to after getting settled. The address the property manager had given us was well off the beaten path, on roads that shifted from pavement to gravel and back again for no discernible reason. Maggie put her hand on my arm as I drove over a particularly choppy patch, murmuring, "Peter," her voice full of angst. I slowed down. "Just excited to get there," I said, grinning. "You think they got foosball?" Maggie rolled her eyes and ignored me as I drummed on the steering wheel. "I think I forgot my phone charger. I'll have to use the one in here," she said. It wasn't difficult to spot the driveway to the property. We'd been careful to arrive a few minutes after 3:30 p.m., per the terse instructions from the property manager. "I think that's him," Maggie said. A man, maybe 50, reclined against a metal gate. He was wearing a brown utility jacket, jeans, and leather work boots. When he noticed the car's turn signal, he heaved himself up and began swinging the gate inward to allow us in. I eased the car onto the shoulder and through the gate. As I lowered the window, he turned to face us slowly, his boots scratching the gravel. Before I could greet him, he spoke. Just one word. Wait. Flat and abrupt. I pulled a face at Maggie and exhaled through my nose. I watched the man in the rearview mirror as he closed the gate behind us. He ambled back to the car and bent at the waist to look in. Afternoon, I said brightly. What a great piece of property. He glanced up and beyond the car to the lawn and the trees. A lot of mowing, he said. I can imagine. Hope you have a rider, I offered, trying to neutralize his cold demeanor with banter. He said nothing, but tilted his head to look past me at Maggie. She offered him a tight smile. I soldiered on in spite of him. Should we open and close the gate whenever we go? Every time, he said, straightening to signal the end of the conversation. Park it there, he grumbled, gesturing to a gravel pull-off beside the drive. When I'd parked the car, Maggie and I exchanged a nervous smile and stepped out. Unwilling to let the awkward silence dominate our arrival, Maggie introduced herself and me. I'm Cal. House is down the hill there. He pointed down a gentle slope to the A-frame we'd seen on the website. You'll have to hoof it from here. Can't have you driving down over the grass, he instructed. I wouldn't dream of it, I said, the slightest twitch of sarcasm. Maggie, not finding it slight at all, spoke to keep me from carrying on. Are you from the area, Cal? I'm local. I was in Warren for a stretch, but I've been back for a while, he answered. Cal walked ahead of us, evidently unbothered by the sight of two people 15 years his senior hauling suitcases down the hill. Once we'd reached the house, he spoke again. I'll just go over a few things about the house. He opened the front door and stepped in. Inside, I noticed a staircase leading down from the entryway to what must have been a cellar. The stairs looked like a trap door, positioned so close to the entrance that someone could easily walk in and fall straight down. At the bottom, cast in shadow, was a heavy wooden door. Cal followed my gaze. That's the basement. It's locked. Off limits. He stalked deeper into the house without us. I looked at Maggie with wide eyes. Locked and off limits. Any questions? She shushed me and walked through the door Cal had passed through. I found them in the open-plan living and dining area. The room was bordered by huge floor-to-ceiling windows. The view of the woods and the mountains beyond was spectacular, just as the listing had promised. There's a sliding door here to access the deck. That's where the hot tub is, Cal said. After a few more standard check-in items, thermostat, lights, door locks, Cal said, that's about it. Oh, right, fireplace. We've had it decommissioned, so no fires. He must have caught a flicker of disappointment on Maggie's face because he added, keep out of it. With that, he wandered toward the front of the house again. Maggie kept her voice low. That's genuinely a disappointment, Peter. I wanted to do fires every night. Not only is it decommissioned, but he said we had to keep out of it. We're not even allowed to play around in the ash and soot, I joked. Oh well, Maggie sighed. The rest is perfect. Yeah, apart from the hike down from the car, I said. Good training for the real hiking we're going to do, Maggie quipped. We returned to the front door to find Cal waiting on the stoop. Thanks for the tour, Cal, I said politely. It was nice to meet you. I'm sure we'll enjoy the stay. I'll see you, Cal offered, turning to go. Oh, do you live on the property too? Maggie asked. I'll be around whenever I need to, he said, something like defiance in his voice. It was hard to gauge his intent with his back to us. Before either of us could respond, he trudged up the incline toward the cars. Maggie swung the door shut erasing Cal from view. "What the hell was that?" she said, an uncharacteristic edge in her voice. Maggie had bottomless wells of goodwill, but something about our host's relentless, almost aggressive affect had rattled her. "I've got news for you," I said. "That guy's a bona fide weirdo. And I'm not just saying that because he's an ex-con." "He's what?" Maggie almost shrieked. "He told us he was in Warren. That's where the maximum security prison is. He even said, for a stretch. That's prison lingo. Don't you think I'm right?" "Maybe," Maggie said. "And maybe you just watch too much HBO." It was after we had unpacked and started poking around the house, as one does in a rental, that we noticed some things we hadn't seen on the listing. The decorations were severe. There were large, ornate wall hangings made of wood and twine, at least 4 sealed pieces of pottery that looked like urns, and, worst of all, a grotesque mask. The face was sneering and contorted, with long, curved horns sprouting from its forehead. Maggie hated it and asked me to take it off the wall. It wouldn't budge. The sun was starting to set, and Maggie was in the kitchen putting together the meal we'd prepped at home and brought along in a cooler bag. "Put that down," Maggie hissed when she saw me shaking one of the pots beside my ear like a Christmas gift. "You can't hear ash anyway. And if that's what it is, it's a horrible thing to do." "This from the lady who wants to dismantle their wall hangings," I shot back. "When you get past their decorating taste, the place is pretty cozy." "How would you describe it?" Maggie asked. "Somewhere between New England Witch and Dante's Inferno." After we'd done the dishes, Maggie wanted to stargaze on the deck. "Are you sure you don't want to break into the basement or play around in the fireplace?" I asked. "Tempting," she said, gathering a few knit blankets from the couches in the living room. "Did you see the basement door? It looks like they had it imported from a castle in Romania. Come look." We stood at the top of the stairs and looked down. The light from the entryway didn't reach the bottom. It just thinned and vanished halfway down the steps. The door itself was a deep, uneven brown, crossed with black iron bands that caught the light like scars. "Yikes," Maggie murmured. "Who are they trying to keep out? The Huns?" "You mean, who are they trying to keep in?" I teased, prodding her in the ribs. "Pick a picture of it. Charlie loves weird old stuff like that." I took out my phone and focused it on the dim outline of the door. Something about it made me keep my distance there at the top of the stairs. As I hit the button to snap a photo, the stairwell was bathed in an unnatural blue-white light. "Your flash is always on," Maggie said. "It's automatic," I protested. "Well, the kids showed me how to turn mine off." "They must love you more than me," I said sulkily. The deck was a great space. We could use the hot tub, read on the chaise lounges, or stargaze. It was late enough in the season that we didn't need to worry about bugs, but not so cold yet that we would suffer after sunset. We were both exhausted from traveling. We poured 2 glasses of wine and sat beside each other in the Adirondack chairs, our heads tipped back to see the stars. It was so wonderfully quiet. I must have drifted off, because the next thing I knew, Maggie was gripping my wrist. "Peter," she whispered with real urgency in her voice. "What the hell is that?" I opened my eyes and sat up. Maggie was already standing, but she wasn't looking at me. She was staring past me, out over the deck. I stood and turned. "Where?" I asked. "Shh," she said. "There, down the hill." She pointed. I stepped to the deck's rail and squinted into the dark. Below the deck and backyard, the ground sloped sharply away. A thin stand of birch trees, their leaves already gone, stood before another clearing. There I could see lights. They were moving. They dipped and glided slowly. "There are 6 of them," I said. "What are those?" They're people, Maggie whispered. They have lanterns or something. Shapes began to take form as my eyes adjusted. Dim, hunched figures that swayed with the light. Maggie was right. There were people out there in the dark. Are they dancing? I asked. This is so weird. I don't like this, Maggie said. Her voice was small. It's okay, I said. There's another house right over there. I saw it when we walked down from the car. I'm sure it's rented out this week, too. That doesn't make this any less weird, Peter. That's true. Well, what do you think they're doing? A creepy frat rush week thing? Low-budget student film? Maggie didn't answer. I heard the sliding door open behind me. Then her voice from behind me in the dark. Come inside and lock it behind you. We both woke in the morning refreshed and determined. Today we were hikers. We had a mission, however modest, to redefine the next phase of life as something other than parenthood. For more than 2 decades, Meg, Matthew, and Charlie had filled every room of our heads. 20 years. I loved the firmness of that number. It was a career, not a sentence. There had been days, even years, when I believed our little unit would stay sealed forever. The 5 of us, orbiting the same kitchen table. But the kids had moved outward, as they should. They still belonged to us in some ways, but more and more they belonged to the world. We had to follow their lead. Maggie and I had to become something new. I was making coffee in the kitchen when Maggie wandered out to join me. It was already a tremendous day. The sun shone in through the windows, bathing the house in light. The Mr. Coffee grumbled softly on the counter. Did you run a pot of plain water through before making that coffee? Maggie asked. I did not. Why would I do that? Meg told me you have to, just in case the last guest peed in the coffee maker. Peed? I asked. Why would someone pee in a coffee maker? That bathroom is alarmingly close. That's what Meg said. She's rented a bunch of Airbnbs, Maggie said. I nodded, considering this wisdom. How much pee did our daughter drink before learning this lesson? Maggie didn't answer. Instead, she opened the reservoir on the coffee maker and inhaled theatrically. Your analysis? I offered. I guess it's fine, she replied. We'd set off from a trailhead less than 3 miles from the house that morning. By 1 o'clock, we were worn out and hungry. The stark November sun and crisp air had given me a burst of energy that didn't quite match my mood. I thought about those strange lights on the neighboring lawn as I fell asleep the night before, and again as we climbed beneath the gray lace of leafless branches. Hiking, I realized, wasn't going to fill the space left by rides to soccer practice or late-night talks about college application essays. Maggie was seemingly less distracted by the odd nighttime scenery of our rental house. She was full of energy and purpose, the kind she brought to any new project. She charged ahead on the trail, narrating the landscape like a park ranger, the type of pine, the sound of the stream, the glacial rocks that looked to her like old sleeping animals. I admired her ability to switch gears so completely. Maybe this was how she was going to cope, with motion, with new places, with naming things. I, on the other hand, kept glancing at the tree line, half expecting to see one of those wandering lantern lights, even in the broad daylight. When we returned to the house, and I closed the gate behind our car, the sun was already sinking behind the trees. Maggie and I noticed Cal's truck parked in the gravel beyond the gate and exchanged puzzled looks. Is he doing landscape stuff? Maggie asked. He seemed pretty protective of the grass. I shrugged. We picked our way down the slope with cautious, measured steps. I kept my gaze fixed on the property beyond the birch trees. No cars, no lights in sight. Looks like our neighbors checked out, I said to Maggie. She lifted her gaze from the precarious decline at her feet to the house beyond the trees. If we see Cal, I want to ask about that house. Whatever that was last night was weird. Maybe the asshat lives there, I offered, opening the front door. Cal stood, staring, inches from me, just inside the threshold. Cal, I started. What's going on? What are you doing in here? He looked down at my feet and then up again, as if deciding whether he could take me in a fight. The thermostat should be working now, he said abruptly. Right. Were they not before? I said slowly. Is there something you need? An impatient edge crept into my voice. I could already feel Maggie's restraining hand on my arm. You heard me say the basement was off limits, he said flatly. Is that a question? I said without thinking. Maggie's hand moved swiftly to the middle of my chest and pressed against me. Yes, we're happy up here. Thanks for the reminder, she said brightly. Cal, by the way, what's up with the folks renting the next house over? We saw them outside last night. Cal raised his eyebrows incredulously and stepped past me onto the stoop. Just when I was sure he was going to ignore Maggie completely, he said, There's no one renting that house. He stalked off up the hill. Maggie closed the door behind him. Damn, I said. I should have invited him for dinner. An hour later, Maggie and I were in the kitchen, working on an improvised pasta dish. A fierce disagreement had broken out over the idea of including fennel in the recipe. It's going to ruin it, Maggie protested. I will die on this hill, I shouted theatrically. We bought this bulb of fennel at that weird local market, and we're going to use it. Maggie held the bulb of fennel like a baseball over her head, ready to fire it at me. Use it on your eggs, then. It's going to ruin the pasta. I snatched at the fennel, grasping only air. Maggie danced away from me, giggling. As I closed in, she raised her arm and threw it across the kitchen. The pale green bulb bounced on the wood floor and rolled into the fireplace on the opposite side of the room. Now you've done it, I said. I'm not allowed to play around in there. Maggie accepted defeat and sauntered to the fireplace. I got back to work slicing cherry tomatoes on the counter. No way. It was Maggie's voice, stunned and reverent all at once. What is it? I asked without turning around. Come and look at this, she called. Her voice had a caged, echoey effect. I turned to see her crouched, looking in and up into the fireplace. As I approached, I saw the bulb of fennel now scuffed with black soot. Maggie pointed into the corner of the brickwork where the fireplace chamber met the chimney. I didn't see anything, so I stooped and craned my neck to look in and up. A large metal key hung from a hook. If you were anywhere but on the floor beneath the mantel, you'd never see it. Oh, that goes to the creepy basement door. No doubt about it, I said. Why would it be hanging in there? Maggie asked. To keep guests from finding it, I suppose. It's a bit cloak and dagger, though, isn't it? What happened to stuffing it in a cabinet somewhere? Well, we're not going to find out what it opens because we're not touching it, Maggie said in a tone of finality. Fine by me, I answered. Maggie didn't want to stargaze on the deck that night. We read in the living room under the leer of the grotesque red mask. After a few minutes, Maggie stood and wordlessly left the room. She returned a moment later with a sheet. I watched with mild amusement as she pulled an ottoman to the wall and stood on it to hook the sheet over the mask's curved horns. She hopped down gingerly and gave me a satisfied nod, which I returned. It was full dark outside by then. I stood in front of the enormous windows that flanked the back of the house. I wanted to see if the figures had returned to the lawn beyond the birch trees. With the lights on, I could only see my own reflection in the living room behind me. Without saying anything to Maggie, I slid the door open and stepped out onto the deck. Leaning against the rail, I strained to see into the dark. I felt vulnerable, standing there above the place we'd seen those people, silhouetted by the light blazing inside. I was ready to go back in almost immediately, but suddenly the lights inside cut out. A moment later, Maggie opened the door. "Are they back?" she whispered. "I can't tell yet. My eyes will adjust in a minute, now that you turned out the lights." It didn't take a minute. They were back. There was enough moonlight to see that now. More of them this time. Or perhaps the same 6 we'd seen the other night, but there were other figures too. Smaller, and without robes. "Are those children?" I asked Maggie, unease rising in my voice. "No, they can't be. It's after 11 at night," she murmured. But then they moved. The 6 larger figures dressed in the same dark robes we'd seen the other night parted and stood in 2 lines of 3. The little ones, they were children, crouched or kneeling, stood and processed between the lines. I counted 8 of them. They were wearing white pants and loose-fitting white shirts that shone eerily in the moonlight. They walked, holding hands, tentative, careful not to stumble in the dark. The group passed between the looming, robed figures and down the slope into the woods. As soon as they'd broken through the tree line, they vanished from view. Maggie and I watched, perplexed and unnerved. The robes waited until the last child had slipped into the trees before following. In seconds, the lawn was empty, and we both stared at the space in the trees that had swallowed them up. "Should we call the cops?" Maggie asked. "What do we tell them? The neighbors are weird?" "I don't know. Those were kids, though." "Yeah, I'm still holding out hope that it's an independent film or some kind of performance art." Maggie pressed her head against my shoulder, shivering. "I didn't see any cameras, and I didn't see an audience." "Are we the audience?" I asked, pulling her against me. "Not funny, Peter," she said. But I wasn't sure I'd been joking. Hours later, I woke to Maggie shaking my shoulder and saying my name. There was panic in her voice. "Peter, wake up!" I started with a grunt and asked her what was happening. "There's someone in the house," she whispered. "What? Where?" "I went downstairs for a drink. When I was in the hall by the stairs, I heard it. It was in the basement." "What did you hear? What time is it?" 5 a.m. It was a few thumps. I guess it could have been something falling over, but why would something fall over down there? Why aren't you freaking out?" "Sorry, I didn't hear it. You did." "Do you want to call the cops, or do you want me to go down and listen?" Maggie hesitated. I could see her jaw clenched in frustration. "Fine, go down and listen. But I'm coming," she concluded. "Get a knife from the kitchen as soon as we get down there." 15 minutes passed before I spoke. Maggie and I were at the top of the basement stairs, exchanging strained glances. The massive basement door stood in deep shadow below us. Outside, the sky was beginning to tinge with early morning gray. "I haven't heard a thing," I said at last. "I heard it," Maggie shot back. "I know, I believe you, but I think it's time to put the knife away and make some coffee." We stood in the kitchen, sipping coffee and talking over a plan for the day. I was waiting for Maggie to say she wanted to leave. Between the theatrics on the lawn next door and the noises in the basement, I wouldn't have blamed her. But she didn't. Part of me wished she had. In the end, I think both of us were afraid that if we'd packed up and left, we'd get home and realize that we had talked ourselves out of the first adventurous thing we'd done since the kids left home. "Do you think it's him?" Maggie asked suddenly. "You mean Cal? In the basement?" She nodded gravely. "Yikes. He's a weirdo." I guess it's possible he's messing around down there, I said. Messing around or spying on us, she said as she pulled on her boots. I'm going to walk around the house, see if there's another entrance to the basement. I shrugged. Okay, I'm going to stay here and do the wordle. I got it in 3, she said over her shoulder as she walked out the front door. I sat on the couch and puzzled over the word game for a few minutes. A loud thump echoed from the basement below me. I sprang to my feet, but then froze to listen. Not hearing anything else, I let out a breath and decided it was probably Maggie, trying a door or a window outside. But then I saw her. She wasn't anywhere near the house. She'd wandered to the little cluster of birches at the edge of the lawn. I surmised she wanted to investigate the scene of last night's performance. Screw this, I said aloud. I knelt and reached into the fireplace. Then I pounded down the steps to the basement with purpose. Part of me was trying to maintain a confidence I scarcely possessed. Part of me wanted anyone who might be down there to know I was coming. The big brass key slipped into the lock easily. I expected to have to wrestle it open. It looked 100 years old. The door latch snapped loudly when I depressed it, and I had to push with my shoulder to get it moving. Once it began to swing, it opened easily. I found the basement silent and dim, but not dark. There must have been windows along some of the exterior walls because gloomy gray daylight filled the space. I wandered farther in, between shelves that formed a little corridor. The shelves were filled with boxes, many labeled with dates. I saw some as old as 1910. Beyond the shelves was a large open space. 4 narrow windows, high up in the foundation, let in a dull wash of light. That was when I began to focus on the contents of the room. There were masks, but not like the one upstairs. That one could be passed off as folk art. These were formed from twisted twigs, tree bark, branches. The faces were hideous. They sneered and gaped at me. I couldn't understand how primitive materials like those could form such human, wretched expressions. They hung from pegs driven into the stone foundation. I counted 6 of them. It was clear enough that I was alone down there, but I wanted to get out just the same. I backed toward the shelves without taking my eyes off the snarling masks. I hated looking at them. They felt so wrong here. Out of time. Pagan. As I turned to leave, I couldn't help but tip open the lid of a white cardboard box labeled 1938. It was filled with black and white photos. I pulled a stack from the top. The scenes in the photos were eerily similar to the moonlight show we'd seen outside the night before. People in robes, posed or standing in a formation, as if in a choreographed dance. One photo showed a mask I recognized from the wall behind me. It was mounted to a tree. At the base of the trunk, a woman knelt in a white dress. Her arms were splayed as if to embrace something or someone. I felt a hand rest on my shoulder. I shrieked and leapt away, the stack of photos spraying to the floor. I spun, fist cocked. Maggie stood in front of me, confusion on her face. "What the hell are you doing down here?" she said sternly. "Oh my God, Maggie, you could have said something," I panted. "I heard the noise. I took the key and came down to check things out." "Check things out?" she asked. "I think this is breaking and entering." "No way. The key was in the house. We rented the house. At worst, we're bad guests," I said. "You're a bad guest," she corrected. "What is all this?" She gestured to the scattering of old photos on the floor. "Wild stuff, that's what it is. Creepiest family photos you've ever seen. These people were into some kind of pagan ritual, like cult stuff." Maggie began picking up photos and examining them. "It looks like they're still into it, Peter. These are just like what those people were doing outside last night. Let's clean up and get back upstairs, I suggested. Maggie was slotting the last of the photos into the box I'd opened when I heard her breath catch in her throat. What is it? I asked. I was already standing at the door with the key in my hand. Maggie was beside the box, looking sick. Her face had gone white. Her mouth hung open in a petrified oval. I'll show you upstairs, she said, slipping a photo into the back pocket of her jeans. You're taking it? I said, incredulous. She strode past me and padded up the stairs. You're the bad guest, I shouted after her. With the door locked and the key back on its hook in the fireplace, Maggie sat across the coffee table from me and pushed the photo toward me. A look of wild restraint colored her face. I couldn't tell if she was horrified or thrilled. The scene in the photo was genuinely disturbing. It showed a makeshift cage built in the same style as the masks in the basement. Twisted wood, bark, twine. It must have been 15 feet long. Inside stood a dozen grave-faced children. Some looked down. Others stared out through gaps in the wooden bars, their faces framed like tragic portraits. Is this real? I said, without looking up. Is any of this real? I mean, could it all be part of some bizarre local tradition or a play they do every year at this time? We'd better hope so, Maggie said seriously. Look at the bottom. Look close. What are they doing? I leaned in and squinted. I didn't want to touch the photo. There were little teepees of kindling built along the base of the cage where it met the earth. I let out a short laugh. No, this is not real. I'm actually relieved. No way this happened here. No way, right? Maggie said. The tension in her voice was beginning to ease. Right. This is upstate Maine, not a Dark Ages village in Eastern Europe. We both exhaled and broke into laughter. I only wish we could ask Cale about it. But then he'd know we found his super secret hiding spot for the key, I said. Maggie smiled warmly for the first time since the night before. So we stay, she asked. We stay and have a fantastic dinner party story to tell. I smiled too. Agreed. After dinner, we took a bottle of wine and 2 blankets out to the deck. We decided we were rooting for the people to put on another show. At least, we'd told each other as much. I was still unnerved by the enterprise, whatever it was. The meticulous props, costumes, the scope of it all. These were still people I never wanted to meet. I guessed that Maggie felt the same, but a sort of wild vacation abandon propelled us. Anyway, we could watch, unseen, from up on the deck, under our cozy blankets. For a while, nothing happened. We chatted softly and looked at the stars. After a second glass of wine, it seemed that nothing was going to happen. I could feel a knot in my back begin to soften, but feigned playful disappointment with Maggie. We agreed to split another glass of wine and call it a night. Then, they appeared. In their usual place, down the slope beyond the birch trees, 6 robed figures. 4 of them carried something low and circular. They placed it on the grass and stepped back. Another pulled something from the folds of their robe and reached into the circle. Flames leapt up, and the figure snatched their arm away. They're doing a campfire, Maggie said softly. We could see them clearly now. The robes were a deep green color. No faces were visible under the heavy green hoods. Nearly all of them had their backs to us. We could bring marshmallows over and introduce ourselves, I whispered. I'm getting a picture of this, Maggie said mischievously. Let me have your phone. Mine's charging in the car. I lay my phone on her thigh in the dark. She stood and shuffled to the deck railing. I don't know if you're going to get a decent picture from here, Plus, it's dark, I whispered. Shh, let me try, she said. I heard the camera app's shutter sound effect. For an instant, blue-white light lit the lawn and trees. Shit, the flash, Maggie hissed. 6 robed figures turned in unison. Maggie began stumbling back from the railing. I heard myself mutter something like, "Oh, no, Maggie." In what felt like minutes, but must have been a few seconds, they began moving toward us. They covered ground quickly. They marched toward the house without hesitation. They moved as if they shared one mind, brushing past bushes, branches, and rocks with terrible swiftness. "Get inside," I said. We fumbled for an instant with the door handle, and then we were inside, checking and rechecking the lock. "The front door," Maggie shouted, but I was already moving. "Call the police," I yelled, pacing back down the hall from the front door. "I don't care if they're just messing around. We're calling." Maggie didn't answer. "Maggie!" I shouted again. When I walked into the living room, she stood, frozen beside the couch. A man in a robe stood motionless on the deck. "Maggie, where's my phone?" I pleaded. She lifted her arm and pointed. "It's on the deck. I dropped it. I'm sorry." The man on the deck had been joined by another dark figure. If they spoke, we couldn't hear. I moved around the couch and stood near the window beside the fireplace. "What do you want?" I shouted with false bravado. They didn't respond. They didn't even seem to hear. I watched, horrified, as they stepped to one of the heavy wooden lounge chairs and took positions at either end. Somehow, I knew exactly what they were about to do. Without thinking, I thrust my hand into the fireplace and seized the key. Maggie watched me do it. I pressed it into her palm. "Go!" I shouted. As we ran toward the front of the house, I could already hear fists and boots pounding on the front door. When I saw Maggie reach the basement stairs, I looked back. 2 green-robed figures were swinging the lounger back, and then forward, toward the window. I didn't stay to watch, but I heard the crash. It roared through the house like a wave. Maggie was already at the basement door, sliding the key into the lock. As I bounded down after her, I saw myself. A rat scurrying into a trap. The fool in a scary movie. And yet, I knew I had to go. The door thudded shut, and Maggie deftly locked it before pocketing the key. I was struck by how collected she seemed. We stood shoulder to shoulder, staring at the door, listening. For a long moment, the only sounds were our breathing and the hammer of my heartbeat in my ears. Then, footsteps. They weren't in a hurry. They knew the pursuit was paused. Somehow, that felt worse. They crossed the house from the rear above us and stopped near the front. A thin crack beneath the basement door allowed sound to travel from the stairs. The front door opened. Someone was coming down the steps, still devoid of urgency. The footsteps stopped as whoever it was reached the landing. We stared at the dark wood planks, banded in iron, waiting for the inevitable assault on the door. Nothing happened. Then, a soft voice, unaggressive, almost cooing, bled under the door. "We need you to come out." Maggie and I looked at one another and said nothing, each of us trying to arrest and quiet our breathing, as if they didn't already know we were here, listening, terrified. The voice, a man's, spoke again. "We know what you saw. The children are safe. They've ascended." Then, a pause. "We thought you understood, until you took our photo." I surprised myself by barking out a reply. "You can delete it. My phone's on the deck. The passcode is 3893. Take it and leave us alone." There was an insufferable silence before the man spoke again, this time with impatience. "We don't want your camera. We want our photo." I looked at Maggie, barely able to make out her features in the gloom. Pulling her by the elbow, I whispered, "He wants that black and white photo. The one where they're about to burn the kids." "Ascension," the voice corrected, clearly having heard me. Maggie began patting her pockets frantically. "I have it," she breathed. She passed it to me, the stiff paper rough against my palm. "You can have that one too," I said, stepping forward and pushing the photo under the door before leaping back. My eyes had finally begun to adjust with help from the moonlight sifting in through the windows. I saw the photo slide out of sight. Something about the closeness of that exchange rattled me, like he was nearer now that we'd given him something. I did my best to steady my voice. "You need to leave the house. We called the cops." There was another long pause. Then the voice came again, terribly calm, terribly confident. "No, you didn't. You can't." I swallowed, trying to clear the lump in my throat. Maggie grasped my hand and whispered, "I don't have my phone. It's charging." I knew this. I pictured it, resting on the console between the front seats of our car. The car. It seemed impossibly far away. Through the door, up the stairs, up the hill. Then there was the gate. A grim satisfaction came over me as I thought of those obstacles. It absolved me of the guilt I felt for rushing to the basement and trapping us. Congratulations, I thought. You might get to die locked in a basement instead of halfway across the lawn. I'd had enough of the conversation, and of him hearing every word we said. I put my hand on Maggie's hip and nudged. We moved back through the corridor of shelves into the open space. "What about the windows?" Maggie asked, looking up. "For getting out? Or getting in?" I replied. As I spoke, a lantern swung into view through one of the small basement windows near the ceiling. Another appeared in the next. We cowered instinctively. I wasn't sure they could see in through the aging, misted glass, but I expected to see a boot crash through at any moment. Instead, the basement filled with a blaze of light. Powerful beams swept through the windows, lighting the far wall and sliding across the floor. The lanterns were gone. I dashed to the nearest window and climbed onto a crate beneath it. From there, I could just see above the sill. A pickup truck was tearing down the hill and across the grass. It accelerated on the flat, then skidded to a stop just short of the figures. A man stepped out. "It's Cal," I shouted. "Cal?" Maggie said, shocked. "What's he doing?" "I don't know. I think he's talking to them. I can't hear." There was a brief exchange of words. Apparently, it didn't go well. Cal reached into the cab and took out a shotgun. The barrel glinted in the moonlight. He aimed straight up and fired. I felt the boom in my chest and ducked. Maggie screamed. "It's okay," I said. "I think he's just trying to scare them off." The figures had scarcely flinched, but after a moment, they began to disperse. They walked slowly toward the birch trees. "They're leaving," I said, the relief already clear in my voice. "It looks like Cal's coming inside." Moments later, we heard Cal's gruff voice call from the top of the stairs. "It's all right. You can come out." I shouted back, "We're not coming out until we get an explanation. Have you called the cops?" He replied with mild irritation in his voice. "Suit yourself. I'll be in the living room when you're ready." Maggie and I exchanged helpless looks and unlocked the door. We found Cal hunched on the couch with his face in his hands. We stood in front of him. I asked the only question. What the hell is going on this property? He seemed not to hear me, but he spoke. Here's what I'll tell you. These people, the family that's owned this land forever, they're not normal people. Maggie scoffed loudly. I took her hand. I didn't want Cal to stop talking. He raised his eyebrows in admonishment, but continued. They believe things that normal folks don't. Stuff the rest of the human race has forgotten about. And for good reason, if you ask me. I've seen things here I shouldn't have seen. Things I won't ever be able to forget. Things I wouldn't tell you, or any cop. Cal sounded tired. I thought I heard a trace of a sob rising in his voice. I can't get work any place with my record. Anyway, they've got stuff on me now. Worse than what I was locked up for. None of that matters now. I keep telling them that if they want to keep the government out of here, they have to pay taxes. The rentals were my idea. Obviously, they don't think much of it. I don't talk to them much, but when I do, I always feel sick after. There's something wrong with them. There's a lot wrong with them. He looked up at us. He was more vulnerable than we'd seen. He looked like he wanted us to absolve him. We said nothing. He sighed and pressed on. I've never known them to do something like this. I know you must be scared as hell and mad as hell. My advice? Leave. Forget this place. I suppose you could call the law. What would you tell them? The property owners broke a window in their own house? Cal stood and held out his hand expectantly. Maggie took the key from her pocket and tossed it to him. I'm going to bed, Cal said. He walked out the front door. A moment later, his truck engine sounded, and his headlights led the truck up the hill at a crawl. We didn't talk to the police. Not at first. Maggie and I packed our things and left the house before the sun came up that morning. We found my phone on the deck, shattered and bent nearly in half. A souvenir, I'd thought grimly. 4 days passed at home. We ate, talked, and slept almost normally. We'd each taken turns with nightmares. Maggie had spoken to a therapist and scheduled an appointment for the following Tuesday. She'd been urging me to do the same. It was during a conversation on that topic that I blurted out, I don't want to talk to a therapist. I want to call the police. The doorbell rang. Maggie pulled the kitchen window shade aside. A Maine State Police cruiser sat in the driveway. You have to be joking, Maggie murmured as we both started for the front door. Good afternoon, folks. The state trooper was tall and broad-shouldered. He smiled faintly when we greeted him and invited him inside. We sat at the kitchen table across from him. Maggie set down a cup of coffee and he nodded before beginning. Last week, you were guests at a rental property in Maine. He delivered it as a fact. Perhaps a tactic he learned to shorten interviews like these. The caretaker, a man named Calvin Brooks, has gone missing. The circumstances have been deemed suspicious. Maggie and I remained placid. I watched as the trooper seemed to note that we weren't surprised by this news. You were the last people to book one of the houses on the property he manages. I'll just get to the point, because I have a long drive ahead of me. Folks, did anything out of the ordinary happen during your visit?